Hello, everyone. Welcome to 2022 and our first Fireside chat of the year. The idea of this format is very relaxed. We're basically just getting people around the world and having chats about different aspects of work from anywhere, one to one, in a very, very casual format. Today, we're very looking forward to having Jessalyn of Dune Consultants on with us today. I'm going to bring her on right now and let's get going, I guess. Jessalyn, you're very welcome to our Fireside chat. Thank you for coming on board. Appreciate it.
Excited to be here. We've already got a lot of great stuff to chat about today.
I know, 100%, 100%. And by the way, if you hear me feeling a bit sniffly, I'm at the back end of COVID, so we're hanging in there, though. We're all having a bit of fun isolating here in the house. But again, it's a great thing with remote work. We can do this stuff and still, be working away at the other side of the world, I guess. So tell us, whereabouts in the world are you in now, Jess?
Currently in Amsterdam. We'll call this primary residence. I live here full time as a tax resident. That's where I am right now.
How long have you been there in Amsterdam?
Since May 2019.
Mm.
And before that, I was in Dublin, Ireland. And before that, I was in the United States. And before that, I've also lived in India and Australia.
I used to live in Amsterdam. So our eldest Rosa, she was born in Amsterdam. I spent 8 years in the Netherlands, 4 years in Delft, and 4 years in Amsterdam. Whereabouts in Amsterdam are you living?
Do you know De Pipe?
Oh, De Pipe. Oh, yeah. Oh, the cool, trendy.
Oh, the hip, cool part. I love this neighborhood. I can walk out my door and within a 10-minute walk, everything I need, which is bad because I almost never leave the neighborhood. The one time I might need to leave is like an IKEA visit, but I don't really love IKEA stuff in my home, so that doesn't happen very often.
Fascinating. I have to say, I loved my time in Amsterdam. We were living in Overtoom and right beside Vondelpark, and just being on the bike all the time. I can't wait to go back at some stage for a long weekend.
But, I love good bicycle culture.
It's
this offset with me of living in the mountains and going hiking and camping, which is my biggest hobby. But living in the mountains, I will never sit on a bike. I don't do hills. And then Amsterdam, I love the Netherlands because of bicycle culture, and the trade-off is that I don't have hiking.
Of course. You'd have to pretty far to go to get to the nearest hill, and I think there's as rare as hen's teeth in Amsterdam and in the Netherlands in general. But in any case, thanks a million for coming on today, Jess. And obviously, you've a huge amount of experience in around tax, international tax, and managing a lot of those risks and the compliance side of it. But can you talk to us a little bit through your whole career and what kind of got you into tax, I guess, in the first place?
Yeah, I'm a tax consultant that doesn't do taxes, is what I say. And, first, if I meet someone on the street, I say, oh, I'm an accountant. Oh, so you're like an auditor. No, I'm a tax consultant. Oh, so you can do my taxes. No, I don't do taxes. So I used to. My background, I did study accounting in university. I am a certified public accountant, though I don't really utilize that license. It looks good on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
And in the first part of my career, I worked in public accounting and I did a lot of tax compliance, as we would say. Like I filed tax returns. I prepared corporate tax returns and got them filed, and partnership tax returns and got them filed. And this was all sort of in the United States, and individual tax returns as well, and got those filed. So I really got a nice end-to-end experience of what it's like to run and own a business and then pay your own individual taxes, because it was a lot of the tax returns for the owners of those businesses. I didn't love compliance as sort of the future of my career. It had kind of reached a point where it wasn't doing for me what I thought I wanted to do going into the future. I had an opportunity to move to Australia for 1 year with the company I was working for, and I immediately signed up. I'd never been outside the United States, 0 stamps on my passport. I sold everything that I owned, moved off to Australia, first stamp on my passport, and I fell in love with traveling. I was like,
wow, you just got the bug straight away.
Yeah, I was like, I'm going to live everywhere in the world. This is it for me. So after that, it was sort of, how do I structure my career in a way that I can at least move around to countries every few years? It never sort of occurred to me potentially on a month-to-month basis, because that's not easy. Like tax is different in every country. How is that even transferable?
Yeah, of course.
So I got back to the States.
Just out of curiosity, what part of Australia was it in?
Brisbane.
Brisbane. Oh, okay. Oh, Gold Coast, not too far. Yeah.
Lovely. And
Yeah.
when I left, I read an article that was like top 100 things to do in Australia before you die, and I'd done 25% of it, so I was feeling pretty good. So I got back to the States and then did a stint in India for 4 months helping launch a service center, which was sort of less about tax and more about operationalizing a business, which was really great. My Indian counterparts knew more about US taxes than I did. They were all trained at other firms, and we just recruited them and taught them how to use our processes. So went back to the States and I thought, how am I going to structure my career in a way that I can utilize what I've done as a tax person and that become transferable to other countries? How the hell do you do that? By accident, that's a whole story we could get into if we want to, but we got a lot to chat on today. I got a job at a mutual fund company, working in tax reporting. So tax reporting is this idea that you and I earn income, and at the end of the year, the government wants to know about that income so that we can pay taxes on it. You might get a wage statement, or in the United States, a W-2. Maybe in the US, you get a 1099 that tells you how many dividends you earned and that kind of thing. This is all the way for the government in the background to know how much tax you might owe them. And I saw this as my opportunity for something that was transferable across countries, but still tax related. Because there's this global network of tax sharing agreements where countries exchange tax data with each other. And, so I specialize in an area of tax reporting that's US focused, the 1099 reporting, but also FATCA, CRS, and these other things called DAX 7, we won't get into, that are about how do these countries create consistent tax reporting structures so that they can share data cross-border about people that might be residing in different countries where they where they might have tax obligations.
Yeah.
And that worked out for me. So I back in 2017, I said to my employer, I want to live around the world, and you're going to send me to Asia or Europe. And we got that all set up. I made a transfer to Ireland, and then 18 months later, I ended up in the Netherlands, still doing, tax reporting, tax transparency topics. And then I quit that job in May, and I'm doing that as independent consulting now. So that's sort of the high level background. I'll pause there.
So it's very much like a niche area of tax, but also a critical area. I guess a heck of a lot of growth as well. But then it's fascinating because you're then very well positioned to speak of, tax from a kind of a global perspective, what's going on, the trends, but also as very much as a nomad yourself, or somebody who's
personally
very much,
living it. That's right.
passionate. And one of the things that jumped out at me there is I suspect with this kind of work from anywhere revolution that's going on. Brian Chesky from Airbnb incidentally said this week, he's going to be one of their big influencers now. He's going to be every month in a different Airbnb around the world. But
you're going to live full time in Airbnb.
Exactly. But in all seriousness, I do think the fact that, not every company, but a lot of companies now are going to be offering that flexibility to be able to work remotely abroad for, a couple of weeks or maybe even a couple of months. And I suspect, particularly in the US, where a lot of people don't even have a passport in some cases, I suspect there's going to be a number of people who, take a chance on a trip abroad for a couple of weeks that maybe they otherwise wouldn't have been in a position or would have been open to doing, that they're going to take, for example, that trip to Australia. I mean, if you only take 7 days vacation a year, going to Australia is non-runner, isn't it? Whereas if you're able to take 7 or 8 days vacation, plus maybe work a week or two either side remote working, now all of a sudden that's a totally different proposition. And I suspect there's going to be a lot of people just like you who had never traveled before that are going to experience that transformational impact of travel and are going to be hooked. Because once you experience it, for most of us, once you experience
it's an
it, it's an addiction. Now it really is. I'm only just back from Phuket. I was over in Phuket for 5 weeks over in December and January, and it was just it was food for the mind, body, heart, and soul. It was incredible. But I'm conscious as well of if you look at it here, we've got Hannah. Hey Hannah, month-to-month digital nomad here, slowing down after a few years now, though more like 6 months days. Yeah, so you're slow mad, Hannah. Very good. I like it. Tax Ninja, Jessalyn Dean. That is absolutely correct, Jody. She definitely is that. So We've got Hey from Bangkok. You're from Bangkok. Great, Hannah. Well, welcome,
Hey, welcome.
from Bangkok. I was only there, as I said, in Phuket, Hannah, a couple of weeks ago. It was absolutely amazing. It was genuinely food for the mind, body, heart, and soul. And I think because being locked up for 2 years with the pandemic, it had an extra transformational impact on us. I guess having kids and everything in the meantime and running around and all that.
But it's really making us rethink our own priorities and what we want to do with life. And that was a big driver for me quitting my job in May, was that with that job, I needed to be in the Netherlands. My clients are in the Netherlands. I need to show up at their office, and you need FaceTime with them. And so it very much restricted the ability to work from anywhere. I could work from a home, but I couldn't work from anywhere because I need to show up at my client's space. And doing independent consulting, where I am fully remote for my clients, I can now work literally from anywhere. I am not tied to the Netherlands. And so I'm actually in the next 2 months going to leave. I'm going to try and relocate my base to maybe Italy or another country, travel more, because I now can work from literally anywhere because I do all of my consulting remotely. And, if you told Jessalyn 5 years ago, 6 years ago, when she had this bug, that she would not only get to turn this into a full, international travel. I call myself a serial migrant today. I sort of set up shop for 2 or 3 years and then I move on. I can actually on a month-to-month basis take off if I wanted to. And I never dreamed that six years ago. But that shakeup really was, COVID was sort of the trigger for me to have that shakeup.
Well, it's exactly, in many ways. I mean, I try and tie it back to this kind of values shift that we're seeing in the world at the moment. If you go back to remote work and you look at, say, back in March 2021, a lot of employers, particularly in the US, but not just in the US, a lot of employers are saying, right, it's time to go back to the office. And because of that shift in values, people were not going to give up remote work just like that, and they were not just going to go back to the office. And so there was this kind of revolution in many ways where a lot of people said, no, we're not going back to the office. And there was the great migration, particularly in the US, people quitting jobs in record numbers. I mean, there's still a record number of job openings, even at the moment. But coming back
and a record number of job seekers, probably.
Exactly. So even people who are in jobs, they're still looking for new jobs. And if you look at it, that happened in remote work. So within the work from home context, remote work, let's say domestically, but it didn't have, you couldn't see anything or any tie with work from anywhere internationally or international remote work, because COVID had locked all of the borders. There was really very little travel. As you said, it was just in Phuket in December and January. Tourism was not even 5% of what it was when I was there 3 years ago, for example. So a complete difference. But I do think we're going to see, a similar value shift when it comes to international remote working when, travel does open up, because you'll have these people that all of a sudden do get that bug and get the experience of remote working internationally for even a couple of weeks. And once you get that, it's very difficult to give it up,
And I do want to call out, there's something you mentioned, which I think we'll dive into a little bit more. Yeah. There's a distinction between work from home and work from anywhere.
Yeah.
So work from home generally means, your company has an office nearby, relatively nearby, maybe within the same state or region, depending on, your country. Work from home might mean within your own country. That could be pretty broad for the United States, but within Ireland, it could mean, Galway versus Dublin.
Yeah.
But work from anywhere is very different. Work from anywhere means I can physically do the work on a beach in Greece or in an apartment in Cartagena. And that's a very different policy for a company. And that's also a very different tax experience for the individual and the company that they might be working for, or if they're an entrepreneur setting up their own business. So, we'll get into that a little bit more later. But I just want to distinguish work from home and work from anywhere are very different things.
Well, and you see Hannah as well is also saying, big difference needed for Nomad and remote workers too. No, completely agree, Hannah. I think that's one of the exciting things is just these different definitions are coming out. We've got a work from anywhere white paper we're going to be releasing in the next couple of weeks where we tackle this about the definitions as well. I'd also highly recommend of visiting Plumia. They're a project to have like the first digital country in the world, basically. and they're working on a white paper where they'll talk very much about the definitions. So Lily Bruns is very, very good person to follow. She's based in Thailand, actually. I only spoke to her in the last week. But long story short, if you talk about, let's say, the definitions, or some of, maybe it's a bit harsh to say lies, but certainly the lack of telling the truth of some of the remote jobs boards that are out there. So people posting a job and saying it's remote, but then you get into the nuances of it. Talk to us through the different nuances that you have of that, and where it can go wrong.
Yeah. Let's say, my comments are a mix of professional experience, my own personal experience applying for positions and contracts, as well as what I see in sort of I don't know if zeitgeist is the right word. I always misuse that word. What I see on Facebook, Reddit, and Fishbowl, which is a sort of a consulting, anonymous networking site. I see a lot of people complaining about, and I've firsthand experienced this myself, job postings or contract postings, either one, if you're independent. Sorry, there's a fire truck driving by soon. Listing a job as remote.
Yeah.
And LinkedIn is a great tool, but their sort of ability to search more granular detail than remote is pretty low functionality at this point. Because what I see is a lot of people will see a remote job, but they can't ask the recruiter or the hiring manager about the remote piece up front, because it looks bad. It looks like they're not interested in the job. It looks like they're only interested in the remote policy. So they get all the way through these interviews. They get almost to, hiring moment, like job offer moment. And then they find out that there's some untruths in this remote policy. For example, that it's really, 2 days a week we need you in the office, 3 days a week you can work from home. Okay, so there's a restriction on the number of days that they didn't disclose. Another one is that it's really work from home and not work from anywhere. So what they mean is, well, it's remote, but you need to physically hold a residence and do the work at your home, or a cafe is fine, within the cities that we have existing presence or business. And that's very restrictive. That's very different than like what we said, which is a true work from anywhere, sort of remote policy. So I see this in my personal experience, and I see people complain about it in these forums, that there's these untruths or lack of clear policy or intention, but you can't ask it up front, because then it sort of makes you look like that's the only part you're interested in.
Well, yeah, I know, 100%. I think it's one of the tricky things, isn't it, is trying to manage the expectations on both sides. And on the one hand, having the companies, and the jobs board marketplaces or as such, make it easy for candidates to find the right kind of remote work jobs that they're looking for, that the definitions are clear, that if they do want people in the office, that's made very, very clear. You can search by that as well. But I think also as well, from the perspective of, the candidates as well, that the candidates understand that, true work from anywhere you want in the world. I'm sorry, if you're an employee, you can't say to somebody, sorry, I want to go remote work in North Korea for a month. I'm sorry, it's too risky from a data security perspective. It won't work from a tax. We don't have a legal entity. There's there's a list, an endless list of you're a senior or you're a sales engineering role, you've got permanent establishment. There's a whole bunch of myriad of reasons why, from a practical perspective, it would just never work. You can't work anywhere. And so on the one hand, that dislocation between, on the one hand, what the companies are saying, and also what the candidates, are believing is possible as well. I think it's a tricky one, isn't it?
Well, and I see this in these groups I'm in a lot. Somebody might ask the question, well, why can't I work from anywhere? And we'll talk about this, is the tax issues. There are huge tax implications, huge, not just to the company, but to the individual person of working from anywhere. And so that's why they won't allow it. And we'll talk a little bit about, well, what kind of structures would someone then so this is the second half, is those people in these groups, Reddit, Facebook, or Fishbowl, will say, someone will respond and they'll say, my employer lets me work from anywhere. So then you've got these people that go to their employer or to the recruiters and say, well, I know somebody that can do this. I was told in a Facebook group, so it must be possible. Why is it how is it possible for these people, but my company tells me that it's not? And so that's a lot of what I see. And the answer is either A, they've structured it in the right way, or B, they're breaking laws. And it's usually more commonly the B. The company that is actively allowing it is actively flouting that this is going to create a whole lot of issues for them and potentially the individual. I see that a lot.
Well, I'm looking forward to diving in this, because what I would like to talk to you about, what are the common risks to watch out for, the things that can go blow up in your face. But before we do, I'm seeing this from Jody. I'm looking to grow my team outside the US. We're trying to figure out how team members based outside the US can work at my company, which is US headquarters. The only thing we'll be able to do is to have them be independent contractors to my company, and they handle taxes, healthcare, etc. So I tell them to tell me what they need to make to be financially secure, except for payroll arrangements. They get all the benefits of being an employee. I'm the founder, and so they can experiment. I think that's a very interesting one. I'd love your take on that, Jessalyn. There's one risk, like contractor misclassification, potentially might be jumping out, but in particular. But can you walk us through that? I think it is fair to say a lot of companies do go to the default and just hire people as contractors. And that that can be the only option. But of course, there are some interesting things happening here with obviously contractor misclassification. Watch out for employers of record. There's a few different things moving around in that space. Can you tell us how you would look at that in that particular case?
Yeah, I'd break it into 3 buckets. And just for full disclosure, I know Jyoti. So hi, Jyoti. I'm so glad she's here. Before I go through the 3 buckets, I just want to back up a moment. We're talking a lot today about tax, and none of this is financial or legal advice. This is a fireside chat. But there are so many other considerations to work from home and work from anywhere. Like you mentioned, security. I work from anywhere, but I have contracts that explicitly state I cannot work from these 5 countries because the security issues of taking my laptop into that country are too high. I am not allowed to work in those countries. So there are non-tax things, and we're focused here on tax today.
Yeah.
But so to put this into the 3 buckets, the first way that people achieve this is the contractor route. That is an incredibly common route. And the pitfall of that, well, two primary pitfalls that come to mind. John already pointed out one. The first one is it puts all of the burden on the employee or the contractor, all of it. Like Jyoti mentioned, healthcare, paying their own taxes, sorting it out themselves. And that sucks. And she's trying to offset that with additional financial compensation. You tell me what you need to be financially secure that you can pay someone to help you with those things.
Yeah.
At least I think that's what she's doing. So that's the first pitfall. The second pitfall is the one that a lot of people miss, which is the worker misclassification. So this comes up a lot to sort of translate that. In the United States, if people Google, I think it was FedEx got in trouble with this, and Uber's been in a lot of trouble with this. Sort of domestically, there are states that go after some of these companies and say, you're treating these people as contractors, but in reality, what they're doing for you is really the work of an employee. So you can have worker misclassification within the own country you do business in. So that comes up. But you can also have cross-border worker misclassification. And you would really need to get into work with a consultant. And I know John effectively pairs entrepreneurs with consultants that can answer these questions. That's part of your business model. You really need to talk to a consultant in the country. Let's say, Italy, you want to put we'll go with Portugal. That one comes up a lot. You want to put people or allow people to work from Portugal as a contractor. You would need to talk to a Portuguese tax advisor to find out what is the risk, what is the position of the Portuguese tax authorities that if they looked at the work of Jane, we'll call this person Jane, if the Portuguese tax authorities looked at the work that is being performed by Jane, could the Portuguese tax authorities effectively say, look, Jane's doing work for a company. And so she's actually an employee and not a contractor. And we're going to reclassify her as such. That's worker misclassification. And if Portugal does that, 2 things happen. The first one is that the company becomes, the Jyoti's company in this example, potentially becomes liable for all of the payroll taxes and local registrations that they hadn't done, but they should have. And secondly, it creates what's called this permanent establishment risk for the company. which is not the payroll tax level. It's actually the corporate tax level of the company. So that could result in Jyoti's company, for example, actually owing income taxes to Portugal. So worker misclassification can have a knock-on effect. And if you're going to allow contractors in these countries, you need to understand and assess what is the view of that country on what is a worker and what is a contractor, and what is the risk that that country would look at this particular setup and then reclassify that person as an employee.
Yeah.
So
and ultimately
reactions,
that kind of
and then I'll cover the other
companies,
two buckets.
but that ultimately forces people then to so the other buckets. I come back to that example, but that ultimately forces companies to narrow their focus in the countries that they operate in. That they don't go, that they go with intent and consideration into any country,
yes. Intentional,
especially
not
as an
just
employee.
Go anywhere you like.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but the other buckets as well. I mean, that was the first two, I guess.
Yeah. Well, so that's the first way that people do this. They treat people as contractors, and then we walked through the pitfalls. The second way that people might set up, hey, I'd like to let people work in Portugal or the UK or Nigeria, is they set up a subsidiary. They actually set up a local company that can actually contract with that person. The benefits are you're sort of in the systems of that country, you're sort of legally registered there, you're doing the payroll taxes, that alleviates some burden on the employee, and it reduces the sort of catch me later if you can situation. The pitfall is now you've cut a lot more taxes to your company. You're spending a lot more money, not just on the tax itself, but the advisors to help you set it up and sort of the ongoing costs of doing it.
Yeah.
And the third way that people do this is maybe sort of a less discussed option. I'm curious your experience on this as well.
Yeah.
Is local payroll companies. So rather than hiring the contractor, Jane, directly to Jyoti's company or my company, I can make a contract with this company in the Netherlands. And that Netherlands company hires contractors. So my contract is not with Jane. My contract is with a so-called local payroll or employer of record.
Yeah.
And that employer of record can either hire Jane as an employee or as a contractor. Those don't work in every country. They don't exist in every country. They don't solve every risk. There's still some risk that the government could still view this as Jessalyn or Jyoti's problem.
Yeah.
But the upside is the person can have the payroll taxes and healthcare sort of taken care of. It alleviates the burden off of them. Again, you're sort of in compliance with the local expectations of labor laws and all those sorts of things. Like vacation is another one. The Netherlands might say you're obligated to pay vacation of 30 days to someone that's an employee. And if you haven't been doing that, you're also in violating labor laws outside of tax. And the last comment I'll throw in is the what was it? Oh, and so the last benefit of it, a local employer of record, is they can also help with visas for that person if sort of on a longer term basis of being there, 6 months, 12 months, 2 years, that person actually needs a visa. So those are the three ways, Jyoti, that somebody might set this up, and I'm sure there's a fourth one. But
for 100%. I mean, I think the most important thing is whatever jurisdiction anyone's going in with real intent and understanding the lay of the land. Like a contractor, obviously, contractor route is absolutely the preferred route for a company if they can be sure there's not going to be a contractor with classification risk. Yeah. So some jurisdictions are incredibly strict, some are relaxed. Like in the UK, IR35, for example. I think places like, for example, Poland, if I'm not mistaken, a few other jurisdictions can be very strict on contractor misclassification. But then if you look at employers of record, exploding in terms of prominence. And again, very interesting solutions. They're raising a huge amount of money, very, very successful. But again, being intentful and knowledgeable of when you use them, when's the right time to use them, and understanding what risks they cover you for. So, employers of record are fantastic. They have the local legal entity there. But you have to be careful. You've got to understand that they're helping you deal with the payroll tax, individual tax and employment law perspective of it, and very good at those aspects.
Yeah,
that's a part of the pie. The other part of the pie is, for example, permanent establishment like corporation tax risk. For example, if you've got somebody in a very senior role or in, for example, a sales generating role, and you put them into an employer record, you put a couple of them into an employer record in a country, you're absolutely going to generate a permanent establishment risk. And so maybe that's the completely suboptimal approach to do it. Maybe a better approach is to actually, proactively set up a legal entity and manage it that way. Or maybe to restructure and not have them in that country, put them in another. There's lots of different routes to go with that.
But you raise a good point, and I hope this is in your white paper that you're going to be publishing. I'm really excited to read it. You sort of have to make a risk policy, a risk assessment of the two layers. The two layers you just pointed out, which is sort of your everyday contractors. Maybe it's your programmer, your developers, those kind of people. And there's a different risk profile for highly paid executives, decision makers, directors, C-suite, and like you said, sales is a big one. Anyone that sort of generates sales being in another country, those are a much different and higher risk profile.
Yeah. I mean, the biggest risk, and that comes back from, I can't give too much away at our white paper around the corner, but, pretty much one of the biggest risks coming out of it was permanent establishment. That's not going to be a huge surprise. But why is permanent establishment a massive risk? Permanent establishment is the risk that you're going to have to pay corporation tax locally in that country. But it's
in multiple countries, if you've got people in multiple countries.
Exactly. But let's say, I have no idea, let's say you're headquartered in Ireland, which is like a 12.5% corporation tax. And let's say, you go to another country that has a corporation tax rate of maybe 40%. And you send sales generating employees to, remote work or maybe via an employer record or whatnot in that country for a long period of time. It's absolutely fair that country, might come along and say, hold on a second, you got to be paying taxes in our country. And so now all of a sudden, the cost can be huge depending on how much sales obviously you have in that country or your profits and whatnot. So it's a very much, it's a fast moving space at the moment because people are only beginning to kind of come to terms with it and understand this and see and tease how this is playing out. Because obviously with international remote work, it wasn't really a factor before 2-3 years ago.
No, like this stuff, these issues have been around for years in that like the tax principles are very well established. It's the awareness that they even exist. Business owners that are not tax advisors have never really needed to think about this on a global scale. So there is just more attention on a thing that has been there for a very long time.
Completely. I'd like to take on the myths of work from anywhere next, but I'd like this question from Lily. Lily, thank you all for your engagement and your questions so far.
Loving the questions.
Yeah. What if again, I mean, just to reinforce, is one of the things that I should have said from the get-go is that, the idea is we'll give some high-level ideas, a conversation about what to watch out for. When it comes to the very, very detailed elements of it, always consult with your local tax advisor.
Right.
If you're looking for someone cheap and cheerful, go into a local Facebook group in that particular country, and expats in city or country or whatnot. You can get some advisors there. If you're a company, there's plenty of different advisors around that can help you. But in any case, coming back to it, this question from Lily. What if the position is marketing sales online and the contract doesn't need to be location specific, yet the position is unpaid unless you sell? So, I mean, ultimately, Lily, that's a sales role, whatever way you look at it, because you're getting paid in commission. But what do you think?
It was for a service that you performed.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, at the end of the day, if you're, for argument's sake, Lily, if you're working for a company and you're exclusively working for that company, and let's say for argument's sake, let's make this interesting. Let's say they have 100 million sales a year, of which 10 million is in that country. You're after generating that sales for, and let's say you get 10% commission. So now you've got 1 million sales into your bank account. You're delighted with yourself. You're happy out. But the problem is now is that for that, essentially you've generated that sales for that company in that country, and you're working exclusively for them. There's an agent PE risk that basically will come along that will potentially bite the company in the backside, which will basically mean, hold on a second, you've had somebody generating that 10 million sales for you in that country who's been exclusively working from you. Straight away, it's going to be a permanent establishment risk, I guess, isn't it? How would you see that, Jessalyn? Would you agree, or how would you look at that one?
No, I think you covered it. The only thing I would add to that is you then have to talk to your tax advisor. Like, you can split it off two ways. Is this salesperson, this sales and marketing person generating sales of your service or product where the customer, the consumer, or the buyer is in that country, or is it in the home country of your company? So if you've got a US company and your salesperson is sitting in Italy, but really they're just generating sales in the US, like the ultimate buyer is in the US and that person is just physically sitting in Italy, the tax authorities might have a different view of that than the US company with a salesperson sitting in Italy that's actually drumming up business in Italy. The customer, the paying consumer is in Italy. Those are two different slices.
Yeah, no, very, very, very good point. And I think, what everyone's going to be conscious of is that, what people got away with before and in the future will be very, very different. So before, with so many of, and I've said this again and again, but so many of the visa and tax databases were very much paper-based in a lot of different countries, not everywhere, but a lot of countries, especially the visa. What we've seen the last 5 years alone, look at places like India that have digitalized the whole visa process, for example. A lot of countries, like COVID has accelerated digitalization, and guess what? It's also accelerated digitalization in visa and tax databases. So, for a lot of countries have stepped it up a gear. It's just a matter of literally just looking from a risk profile. Somebody's coming in and out of the country quite a lot. Hold on a second. We need to bring them into border for questioning at immigration, for example, like they do in the US. And then straight away, all of a sudden, you might have a risk like that. And another question from Jody again. So much shifting globally. Are different governments changing tax policies to make work finding easier or difficult, especially as political agendas? Millennials are the largest demographic, not sure globally, but at least in the developed nations. I would think we should be seeing more favorable policies as millennials will be voting in this direction. So the political element of it, very, very good point. But I think, coming back to it, her core of her question, are governments changing their tax policies? What do you see about this?
In what I'm seeing, no, or at least not to the level that other policies are moving. It's a very interesting question. I'm so glad Jody asked this. I can use an example, but I'll sort of give the highlight first. I see a lot of changing policy with visas. Digital nomad visas are amazing. The ability for somebody to come live in a country for longer than their 90 days or 6 months. And usually there's caveats on that. So long as they're working for, they're earning money, from outside. They're not taking a job from someone local is sort of the crux of it. So those digital nomad visas are really picking up, especially in Europe, where they're trying to get people to come in that aren't taking a job from someone, but are going to spend their money, at least on rent and food and those kind of things.
Yeah.
So there's a huge uptick in that. And I'm loving watching that. But the tax policy does not always follow and can actually be different than the visa policy. So 2 examples, one where it does and one where it doesn't. I see that, I think it's Malta, don't quote me on this. Malta has a digital nomad visa that also says, so long as you're not working for a Malta company, or so long as you have no connection to Malta, you don't need to pay any taxes here, you're good. Like, it's sort of very broadly written. Don't quote me on that. Please do your own research. But it's a digital nomad visa that addresses tax, is my point. The other side, as an example, is, I'll just use the Netherlands because I live here and I've looked into this. There was an interesting case recently where this was a woman that had come from, I think it was China. She had come to China. This was an immigration case. She'd come to the Netherlands from China. And what she did was she formed a company. I'm sort of vaguely recapping, so apologies if I get the specifics wrong. Yeah. She formed a company and then hired herself as an employee. And she was the only employee of the company. And her immigration status was there. Then she sort of formed a company and sponsored herself as an employee. And brought herself in as a highly skilled migrant kind of employee visa. And the court case effectively said, you can't be both the owner of the business and the employee, and sort of struck down that she was even eligible for that visa in the first place. I tell that story because in the tax space, there were lots of Americans panicking about this in the internet space, because there are Americans that can come to the Netherlands on a visa called the DAFT visa, and it allows you to come to the Netherlands and in an entrepreneurial setting, not take a job from a Dutch person, you form your own business. You can do that either as a sole trader, that's my setup, or you can form a company and hire yourself. Either way, the immigration status is that you didn't take a job from someone else. You're running your own business. But the structure, the corporate structure, is sort of neither here nor there for immigration purposes. But if you do form the company and hire yourself as an employee, there are tax benefits to doing that. So a lot of people started panicking and saying, oh my gosh, what we do here to get here on this visa, we need to watch this court case real carefully because it's going to impact what we're doing over here. And in my mind, this is an example of the visa definitions of a resident and an employee and an entrepreneur are not always aligned with the definitions for tax purposes. So there can be mismatches and it's hard to know. But that's also a lesson learned for the audience here. Don't always assume that the definition of employee and entrepreneur for immigration purposes are the same as they are for tax, because they aren't.
Well, so a couple of things to follow up on that. I mean, coming back to the question, Jody, are governments changing their tax policies? Basically, it's definitely on the agenda around the world because, one of the questions, look at Ireland, for example. Ireland's a good example. The vice prime minister, Taoiseach Leo Varadkar, he came out a couple of months ago and he more or less said, listen, we have got a challenge on our hands. And why is that? Because Ireland's model for the previous 30 years was to have low marginal income tax rate to then basically generate the income as well as high VAT receipts and sales tax, things like that. But the core of the plank was all for the companies. Whereas the challenge now is it's equally as much, if not more, attracting the talent, attracting the mobile workers, for example.
That's right.
Remote workers, And so that's one of the ones that definitely will shift. So someplace like Ireland that has a very high marginal tax rate, that will have to change. They will have to change some bit.
That's right.
On the other hand, you're also seeing digital nomad visas. They are offering 0% local income tax in a number of the digital nomad visas. Not every one of them, but in give or take 50% of them. You can see they're changing every week. But the problem with that is that yes, that gives you 0% income tax for a period of time, but it doesn't cover you for wealth tax or capital gains or anything like that. If you sell shares or crypto in that country, in the vast majority of cases, you can still become tax residents.
And social insurance taxes. A lot of times those exemptions are for income tax, but not your social income tax, which can be 25-30%.
Absolutely. It can be even more. In the case of France, it's like 45% social security, for example. So, versus I think it's Denmark is close to 0%. But just one aspect of it. So yes, companies are definitely going to be shifting how they deal with this, but there's also the quality perspective that you don't want to be able to attract people into the country and then all of a sudden they buy up massively increase the price of property or rentals and whatnot and push locals from some of the nice areas, for example. That's a tricky thing to manage. But on the other hand, then creating these ecosystem communities where you can get top talent and innovative startup entrepreneurs and whatnot to help create local jobs and feed into the local ecosystem. It's a really tricky balancing act, but definitely it is on the agenda.
There's one other example I wanted to share, which is Portugal. I haven't quite gotten to the answer on this one. I'm not an expert on Portugal, so please take this with a grain of salt. This is just from my own investigation. Portugal has these visas where it's getting really easy to move to Portugal because within the visa, I forget which one it is. It's a D something, maybe the
D7 visa.
If you have a letter from your employer that, let's say you're coming from the US, they'll sort of say, if you have a letter from your employer that gives you permission to work here, we'll approve your visa and you can come work here. And people are like, great. That again, immigration does not equal or talk to the tax side. So the only thing that comes to my mind is these people are getting approved for these D7 visas with letters from their employer, and they're effectively outing the company through that process as potentially having a PE risk in the company. There is
Yeah.
nothing stopping the tax authorities in Portugal from coming to the immigration authorities in Portugal and saying, show me anyone that came in on an employer letter.
Yeah.
Like, what's
Understood.
stopping the tax authorities? Those two departments do not always align with each other. And so I think it's interesting that there's this Portuguese visa that people are gobbling up and potentially putting their employer at risk for doing
Yeah, I know, completely agree. Completely agree. And I'm loving these questions, guys. There's so many questions. It's very engaged today. We always have a pretty engaged audience. Fantastic to see. Brent. Brent is always great for some thoughtful questions. Does the nature of the work as factor into your potential tax? We touched on it already. Yeah, the nature of work absolutely does.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. In fact, it's funny for individual tax, no, but for permanent establishments, absolutely. For the corporation tax risk, primarily. But how about a creator like who wants to have a product for years? Well, I see what you're saying here. You're basically saying, well, if you're a creator and you try and sell something up on I don't know, on Shopify or something like that, for example, how will that factor? Well, it really depends. I mean, a lot depends on the structure, I guess,
Depends
on how you structure it. But yeah, it certainly will have a factor to play.
Yeah. Well, and I think the distinction that usually you have to think about is sort of, is it based on services or is it something else? Services is one of the biggest, riskiest things. And sort of this is, I guess, the myths that I see a lot on Facebook and these other places is people go to Portugal. I'm just using Portugal. I'm throwing it under the bus. I use it as my example. People go to Portugal to work for their employer in the United States. And so because their employers in the US or their, we'll go with employer, they think I have foreign income because my company is foreign.
Yeah.
The company that's employing me is foreign. And that's not true. In 99% of the case, services are sourced, is the word we use, based on where they are performed, which means if you are physically doing them in Portugal, that is Portuguese source income and subject to Portuguese income taxes.
Yeah.
And so I'll just throw out the myth that I see on Facebook, and then I think we'll look at Brent's other question here. Just want to tie in the myth.
Yeah.
Number one is that if you work for a U.S. company, that it's foreign income. No, it's 99% of the time based on where you physically perform those services. And number two is I see this with U.S. people. I don't know how big this is, but I've seen it. People who go to live in Portugal and they say, well, I have foreign income because it's my U.S. company. So I don't have to pay Portuguese taxes.
Yeah, like they set up a Delaware LLC. They might not even be American. I've seen this as well. Non-Americans say, oh, why don't I set up a US LLC in Delaware and then it won't be foreign income isn't taxed in Portugal. I'm fine, then I can do that. I'm like, not that simple. Yeah.
Well, you'll see people say, I'm in Portugal, I'm doing the services here, but because it's a US company, I call it foreign income. So Portugal doesn't tax it. Yay, no Portuguese taxes. Yeah. And then what they do in their US tax return is they claim the foreign earned income exclusion to say, oh, it's foreign income, so I don't have to pay US taxes on it. I'm like, hate to break it to you, it can't be both. You cannot say in Portugal that it's foreign income, but then in the US say it's foreign income. Which country is it if it's not Portugal and it's not US? It has to be income of somewhere. Yeah. So if you're one of those people that's like, not paying tax in any country, either as an employer or an entrepreneur, like have a look at that. That's mostly a U.S. person's problem, but so that's a myth I see.
And linking back to the earlier comment I was saying earlier as well, I mean, I had people come and say, listen, I haven't been paying tax and, could be in Southeast Asia for 5 years. And they say, I want to go and fix this. And it's very, at the end of the day, the tax, we can make it very complex, but at the end of the day, I would often talk to people and say, listen, if you're based in the place, you're resident in the place for most of the year, and you're working there in that same place, you can say whatever you want, but at the end of the day, you should be paying tax in that place. You can make it very complicated tax sometimes, but sometimes it's very easy as well.
Well, I want to mention a point on that because this is another myth, tying in the myths.
Yeah.
I see I think you kind of mentioned this with the Delaware one, but another one I see is Estonia. People are like, oh, I'll set up my company in Estonia. Now this I think Hannah is calling out some questions about self-employed entrepreneurs. That's me. This is an important point for those entrepreneurs, the solo people, is if you set up a company in Estonia, let's say, but you're physically in Portugal and your income is from services, again, where you perform the services, you can easily say, well, I don't have a Portuguese company. I made a company and it's in Estonia, so I don't pay Portugal taxes. But actually, Portugal will potentially look at your Estonia company and say, well, but you're the only director, you're the sole person, you are doing the work in Portugal, therefore it's actually a Portuguese company. And now you've got a huge mess on your hands because you already set up this structure. So you really do, it always ties back to, for services income, this is the slicing of the pie, where are you performing the services? And so, I guess that's just a common myth that I see.
Let's tie into this point. Hannah's mentioned a very important one as well here. I mean, at the end of the day, this the difference between remote workers and digital nomads who are hopping country, every month or every 2 months, I guess. Talk to us a little bit about that. There's obviously this talk about this location independent lifestyle. Can you actually travel around the world and pay zero tax and not have any residency anywhere at all?
In my opinion, are there probably ways to set that up? Yes, probably. In general, 98% of the time, not really. Like, being able to be a taxpayer of nowhere is not really a thing anymore. And if it still is, the governments are working on ways to get rid of that. So I personally wouldn't, tell someone to like plan their entire structure and setup with that in mind when governments are trying to find ways for that not to happen.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, if you're doing regular work and you're generating either income or sales for your company or another company or whatnot, I think it's very, very very, very tricky to try and do a lot. It also depends passport specific everything as well. But if anyone is doing it, feel free to let us know. We'd love to hear. Feel free to mention in the comments. But I think it's very, very tricky.
There's a tax related question on there, which is, even if you could pay taxes nowhere, is that a good idea?
Yeah.
And there's a few ways that it might not be a good idea. One is the societal implications, like, hey, paying taxes helps pay for roads and schools and structures that you use and public transportation. But there's actually a real personal reason why you might not want that outcome, which is when you pay social insurance taxes to a country, you accumulate credit there so that when you get to retirement age, you can actually receive, a government pension or a government payout. And if you go for 5 years jumping around place to place, not paying in anywhere, you're going to have a nasty surprise when you get to 65 or 70 years old and there's no government pension.
But coming back to it, I think Hannah's making a good point, though. I mean, for a lot of digital nomads, they're not trying to avoid paying tax. They're happy to pay tax, but it's just having that base. And that is absolutely a relevant one. I mean, it's one of the ones we're going to see plenty of different solutions, emerge here over the next couple of years. You're looking at the likes of Stripe Atlas, for example. Got some great tools to service location dependence and whatnot. The likes of TransferWise, Revolution, the different banking solutions, and Mercury and beyond as well. But I think it is, it's absolutely a fair point that digital nomads that are happy having a base, they just want to manage and minimize just be smart about their tax.
Managing your taxes, not paying more than you need to is fine.
Exactly. Yeah, 100%. Brent also making a point as well. He's saying about the movement for worldwide minimum tax. What stage is it at? Well, it's been more or less been agreed, certainly if I'm not mistaken, at OECD level, and it's kind of at the implementation side. So in the case of Europe, they're actually working on the finer details of how this gets executed. But more or less, it's only for the larger tech companies, if I'm not mistaken. But certainly you'd imagine over time it'll act as a benchmark. Johnny, great question or great point here. Maybe it'll be Web3 that will enable work from anywhere more favorably and easy. Absolutely. And I do think, look at Plumia. So Plumia is, I'll just make sure I've got Plumia.country is the address. I'll put it in here in the banner so you can see, create a banner. This is the one, show banner, and you can see it. Plumia.country. Well worth checking out. Lily Bruns and the team are doing a great job on that. Fascinating to see how that works. Is it possible? Is it realistic? We don't know. We hope it is. Could be interesting to see how it pans out. But in any case, it is an interesting project to
Yeah.
keep an eye on. Loving the questions. The questions
Yeah.
are
Can
great.
you pull up Hannah's question there from?
I certainly can. I certainly
so I
can.
have a disregarded LLC in the U.S. as a U.S. person.
Yes.
Until I actually claim residency elsewhere, I feel like this is the right situation for me. I pay self-employment there. Sorry, you didn't ask it as a question, but I wanted to call it out.
Yeah, go for it.
That's what I do, Hannah. I am a disregarded LLC. I think that's the right answer for a lot of people. For me personally, it gives me the most flexibility in moving from country to country and not setting up these corporate structures that become irrelevant to me 2 years later when I pick up and go somewhere else. But the thing you have to watch for if you've got one of these disregarded LLCs for US taxpayers is check the country you're going to. Some countries may view those as corporations or corporate vehicles. So I'm making this up. France could say disregarded LLCs are actually corporations. And sorry, Hannah, you've got corporate taxes in France. So that's my method, but that's the thing to watch out for.
Yeah, no, great advice. Honestly, Justin, I've really, really enjoyed today's chat, and I feel, we've been nearly an hour, and we've barely scratched the surface.
I know.
You've been so good. You've been so good. Really appreciate it. Lots of food for thought. Lots of food for thought. I loved your style. Very relaxed. Great advice, and thanks everyone for all your questions. Really appreciate it. Lots of great questions. Very interesting remarks.
Absolutely.
It's been great. I hope the conversation was helpful. I hope everyone that enjoyed it. Please feel free to share any comments down below of anything you want featured in future. And listen, let's keep in touch, Jessalyn. Thanks again. Really appreciate it. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.